Afternoon, everyone. I hope you all had a wonderful lunch and program as we are wrapping up IIPC. My name is Zakiya Collier, and I'm a member of the Shift Collective, and I am your chair for today for Building Inclusive Web Archives through Community-Oriented Programs. And I am here with our panelists, Makiba Foster from the College of Worcester, Jefferson Bailey from the Internet Archive, and Sumitra Duncan from the Frick Art Reference Library. And with that, we will get started. And the way we will do this is we'll have presentations from each of our panelists, and then we will have a Q&A at the end. All right, on to you.
All right, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. I know it's the last session of the day, but hopefully we can get some Q&A going. This is a panel, and we're interested in questions and conversations. So I'm starting off, and I'm going to be talking about a program we have at the Internet Archive called Community Webs, and there's the title of our session. So let's see. Okay. I'll talk a little bit more about the history of the program and what it's up to these days, but just the general mission statement is that we started this program to advance the capacity specifically, originally, for public libraries and community archives to build, originally, web archive collections that were specifically documenting local history and underrepresented and marginalized voices and communities in their areas. So that is the high-level mission statement. So why did we start this program? We started it in 2017. In my role at Archive.it, the department that I manage, or at Internet Archive, we run Archive.it as well, the web archiving service. So we certainly noticed the representation of our user community has traditionally leaned highly to higher education, colleges and universities. In 2017, 2018, it was about 60% of our institutional users. We have somewhere around 1,000 to 1,200 organizational users of Archive.it, depending on how you count them. This is actually the chart from a web archiving survey in 2014. But the stats are actually pretty similar. I mean, many of the respondents were Archive.it users. So the pie chart here is very similar to the makeup of Archive.it institutions. And you can see here it's 52%. So 50-60% college and university, lots of government, federal, municipal, things like that. What is not represented is public libraries. However, public libraries, of course, at least in the United States, we have a very strong, big public library system, about 10,000 public libraries in the United States, and many of them specifically have archival units, especially around local history. So they have like a history room or a local archive as part of the public library. So the fact that they were not represented so much in the web archiving community was something that we decided we wanted to address. So how did we address this? Well, we run a web archiving service, so part of it was going out and getting money from funders or grants for them to subsidize the costs so that we could give people Archive.it services for free. And there's other stuff to it, the program that I'll talk about, but we certainly conceptualized it with some of these ideas around how they would do collecting and how we would design the program and how we would build it out over time. This is very much a hyper-local, local history-focused program. They basically are documenting their region. Generally not their own, they're not archiving their own websites. They're often archiving governments, local arts and culture, and especially marginalized communities, which we'll talk about. So it's a lot of little collecting programs that across the nation. There's also a training and professional development aspect to it. So we build online resources and tools and things like that. We have webinars, and we have symposiums, and we pay for them to come to conferences. We pay for them to get their own professional development if they want to take classes outside the curriculum that's in the program. So there's a a strong training piece to it. It's a library and professional development program as much as a web archiving and collection development program. And so those are the two core pieces. And also we do have a lot of funding to bring them together. There's a Slack, there's a newsletter, so there's a lot of more informal methods of community building and cohort development. Public librarians tend to not have a lot of money to travel and go to conferences and things like that. So they, traditionally have weaker professional networks, not weaker, but they have more limited professional networks. And so one aspect of the development was not just skills training, it was also community building amongst the librarians themselves. We're trying to address their capacity and technology barriers. Many of them have basically no IT support beyond, the terminals in the with the ILS, then library system for basic catalog search. So they don't have web archiving or digital preservations and often even digitization skills, tools, money, equipment, things like that. Since we run a web archiving service online, it's very easy to address their technical limitations as well as their budgetary limitations around getting access to technology. Collaboration and community and some of these other themes that I've already mentioned. Also just getting them to work together to understand how they were building their individual collections. Many of them were implementing a collection development policy for the first time, sharing practices on QA, hosting public events around the collections that they were building as part of the program. So lots of different themes and different aspects. What do they get when they join the program? Basically, we started with public libraries. The program has since expanded. They could apply, and anybody that applied basically was accepted. There was no particular criteria for acceptance. We originally had funding for about 40 or 50, and we got well over 100 applications, which I thought was a good start back in 2017. They get an Archivit account and a data budget, and they get that for a number of years. We recently got funding to expand what they receive in archiving services. So they also get access to a digital preservation service that we run called Vault. So it's both web-based digital archiving as well as non-web digital archiving. We have also gotten funding from external funders as well as major donors, aka rich people, who have given money for us to also provide them digitization services, which is another thing that Internet Archive does a lot of, books and special collection digitization. They get stipends to go to conferences, as I mentioned. They get training, and they get cohort development. So where are we now after 4, 5, 6, 7 years, 6-ish, 7 years of the program? We have over 200 organizations in 8 countries. It is very much US and Canadian focused because that's where most of our funding comes from. So sort of have to stick to those institutions. But if institutions in other countries are interested and want to join the program, they're totally eligible. So we do have some in like the Caribbean and South America and Pacific Island nations. So tend to be smaller ones that don't necessarily have the resources to already be doing web archiving or digital preservation. Pretty good coverage in US and Canada, almost all the states and provinces / territories. What have they created so far over these years? Well, they have over 1,500 web and digital archive collections that they've developed. For the web archiving, it's over 30,000 seeds, and they are almost at 150 terabytes of data collected by public libraries. Many of these public libraries have staff under 10 people in the whole library. So this is, and in some cases, 2 people work there. So, they're contributing fractional time. But that is a large amount of data for what are generally very small organizations. So I think that's pretty exciting. We've talked about the thematic element. They are explicitly we're not mandating exactly what they collect, but they are encouraged to focus especially on things that are not well represented in the traditional archival record. So they're not really supposed to be focusing on rich and famous people or politicians or all those sorts of things. And here's a couple of sample collections on the side so you can see certainly like events that happen. So special events, ceremonies, tragic events as well, of course. And otherwise documenting communities that definitely are not well represented in like university or national level archival collections. So that's exciting. They also present a lot, so they get money to go to conferences, and they, for many of them, it's often the first conference presentation they've ever done, so that's pretty exciting when that happens. And these are conferences big and small. Some of them have presented here at previous IIPCs, as well as very hyper-local ones, so things that might just be in their city or town as far as professional conferences. So a good diversity of presentation and outreach. They also write articles, journal articles, blog posts. They contribute to developing coursework and open educational resources for the community. They've served in professional capacities. Some of them have gotten awards from their state library association for their participation in the, well, not exactly their participation in the project, but for the work that came out of their participation in the project, especially around, documenting local history. What other aspects are? We have a search and discovery portal, so it's actually separate than the Archive-It access portal at archive-it.org. So it's a subdomain, but it actually has a separate design. So all their collections have their own search and discovery portal. We also have some integrations so that all the community webs, at least the web collections so far, are also available in other aggregators like the Digital Public Library of America, which is a big content aggregator in the US, and Ontario, which is an aggregator of cultural heritage collections in Ontario. And we've also done some sort of special collections when they were all collecting on shared topics. So everybody, like everybody else, was doing a lot of web archiving around the pandemic and COVID-19. And another big focus of many of them has been minority online newspapers, which are especially at risk these days. And that is the end of my session. So thanks to the program staff, and thanks to of course, to the funders that have helped pay for a lot of this.
All right, I should full disclosure. I am a former recipient of the Community Webs program, and so when I worked at a public research library, this was sort of the catalyst for me as not an archivist by training, but a librarian, administrator who saw the value of community webs and thought that, and they accepted my project because my project was always focused on Blackness. It was not necessarily about sort of like the general public, because I was working at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. And so they saw the merit of this work. And so that seed is where I am at now, where I'm talking to you about archiving the Black Web. And so Archiving the Black Web was founded in 2019. About 2 years after I experienced the Community Webs project. I am a co-founder along with Burgess Jewels of Shift Collective, with this particular project, which is an intervention to diversify the practice of archiving, web archiving, not only in terms of the collections, but also the people who get to do it. I am not ashamed to say, when I was a part of the cohort, I was probably one of the only Black folks in the program. Well, I was, I think, as well as the only one really focusing on this particular content. And prior to working at the Schomburg Center, I was in St. Louis, and at Washington University in St. Louis, working on documenting Ferguson, which was around the murder of Michael Brown. And at the time, there was work with the Internet Archive to build sort of Black Lives Matter digital archive. So all these things are sort of spinning and ruminating in my mind as I work on the work with Community Webs. And so this is where we come to now with archiving the Black Web. And this is supported by the Mellon Foundation. And the image that you see, I think is important to sort of highlight. This was, we first received funding from IMLS, just to start to investigate the concept of or starting a national dialogue around the sort of disparities within web archiving. Jefferson showed you the slide where who gets the web archive, who doesn't, and coming off of a sort of national and international movement around the movement for Black Lives, understanding sort of like the sort of tragedy kind of lens that started to happen around Black people entering into web archives, and us really wanting to resist that there's a fullness of the Black experience in the digital space that requires us more than just chasing after tragedy. It's important to document that, but there are other things within the lived experience of Black folks in the digital space that should be, if we're really going to make the web archive collecting something that's useful to everyone. And so looking at this, this was May 2020, and I'm pointing out this bird because I think it motivates sort of the work that we do. This is based off of a West African Adikra symbol, the Sankofa bird, and the philosophy is to return and fetch it, and to return and retrieve it. And so the work that we are doing is sort of recovery reclamation work around web archiving that is particularly important for us as we really understand sort of the activity of Black folks in the digital space and why it's important to the historical record and preserving that work. And so, so all that to say, we're rooted in sort of the work that honors memory workers who've always collected community histories and thinking through how we might support that work with them preserving their communities with digital born materials. And so I want to talk about some of the things that we're trying to do with archiving the Black web. So in terms of building inclusive web archives, there are three areas in which we see intersections that we build and sort of scaffold upon each other, and that is training, research, and sustainability. Specifically, training for those who have been excluded, research to explore a part of the web that has been ignored by the academy, and sustainability for a project that understands the promise of Black digital content and why it deserves a practice and a future beyond event-based tragedy-spurred collecting. And so that is the kind of work that we're trying to do with archiving the Black web. And I'll share with you specifically our formal mission. So the mission of HPW is to develop a collaborative strategy focused on research, funding, training, collection development, and public engagement to guide archiving practices for web content about Black people. We seek to contribute viable and equitable solutions to increase available collections of the Black web content by training Black memory workers to produce web archive collections, and by supporting Black collecting institutions to formally create sustainable web archiving programs. In addition to training and the creation of Black web collections and programs, our aim is to support the burgeoning and evolving field of scholarship, exploring Black people's participation on the web and their creation of digital communities. And so that is sort of how we are moving through the work of archiving the Black web. So I'll talk to you a little bit about those three areas and how we're trying to implement those. And so our first grant was sort of exploratory to give us the set the ground, the foundation for how we would try to move through this. And one of the things that we discovered is that there needed to be more opportunities for training. And then also, if we're talking about the Black web, what exactly is a Black web? We understand it to a certain extent, but there is an opportunity to theorize, create some concepts and understanding around the Black web, and then use that to inform how we might build a curriculum that is targeting folks that who have always worked with Black collections, but have not had the opportunity to really explore what that means of collecting and preserving digitally born content. And so the training program will target memory workers. And we use the term memory workers very specifically because we're also looking at the work of community-based archives where folks are passionate, have committed their lives to this kind of work, but aren't necessarily formally trained. And so how do we build capacity within these organizations to support their next phase of collecting a digitally born material of their communities? And so the WARC School is how we are going to set out to do that. And so what we envision is a year-long training program, mainly online, but it will include some kind of one-week intensive, whether that's on the front end or the back end, very much so somewhat similar to what I experienced with Community Webs, which was a module that you went through, and then there were periodic places where you came together as a cohort to build community and discuss things. And so that model works. And so we are also going to move forward with that. One of the things that also that is important for our curriculum is to honor the ways in which these folks will access and preserve this material in terms of cultural competencies and lenses in which they view the world. And so we want to honor that kind of work and make it equally valuable to the skills that we will help them build with the formal sort of web archiving training. Part of the WARC School is that, this is again another plug, we are looking for and recruiting our faculty for our WARC School training. So if you have a passion for a particular area of teaching web archiving, I'm happy to hear from you. Drop me a card and tell me, or send me an email to tell me what exactly it is that you do well, that we might be able to add you to our faculty. Particularly, so the WARC School. So we'll do a call and get folks to participate, but we are centering the work, as I said, of community-based folks that are in historically Black colleges and universities, as well as folks that are working in under-resourced spaces that have large Black collections, that also understand that there is something going on in their community that they are missing out on because they cannot do the work of web archiving for whatever reason. And so also, in terms of the work we're doing is defining the Black web through our research project, which we put together actual practicing web archivists alongside with our academics to really explore this idea of what is the Black web. One of the things that's important for us is to really use this as a model of collaboration. One of the things that we often find is that web archivists and academics, even though the academics they understand the importance of the archive, a lot of times that work is done siloed and not necessarily in collaboration. And so for this particular project, we do believe that it's important to have a cross dialogue back and forth. And so Zakiya is helping to lead our effort on the research project. And so we have about 6 scholars from different parts of the country working on this concept of the Black web, and their framework as of now is looking at it as a constellation. And so Blackness in the digital space, and how there's a galaxy or a community that, I'm not necessarily a science major, I'm butchering this, I'm sorry, in which there is this space in which folks are evolving and rotating around each other. And so the scholarship that's coming out of this right now is also focused a lot on Black women, but there will be some other opportunities to explore other galaxies of Blackness within the digital space. That was a terrible metaphor, but okay. But and so that's the work that we're trying to do around the research project. Lastly is the sustainability project. So we're looking at other models, like we have the model of community webs, but trying to pick and pull out the best practices of what has worked well for other sort of training programs that build capacity in institutions, and picking those and trying to see how archiving the Black web has legs beyond just this general 3-year grant of Mellon. And we do believe that it has possibility for longevity and futurity. The other thing that is important for us is that in terms of the futurity of the web archiving practice, We are thinking through how we provide micro grants as well. So once someone matriculates through work school, there's an opportunity to receive a small micro grant to continue the work and actually implement the program at their institution. So it's sort of two parts. You get the skills that is transferable. You can go help another community-based organization or whoever you want to help with those skills, and sort of partner with folks like Web Recorder as well with open source platforms. And so that's an opportunity to do more of this work without sort of all of the barriers that might be in place. But then also, sort of conceptually or philosophically for us, it's critical for us to diversify the practice of web archiving because we must work to bring more people into the practice. And so the future of the practice cannot be us just coming to this conference and talking to each other every year. I'm thankful to be here, and I'm happy that not only now is our conversation a national dialogue, but by coming to this conference for the third time, it is an international dialogue. So I'm ringing the bell again, but that the diversity of thought and experiences will challenge us to improve the practice of web archiving overall. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
I think he has to put it up there before you can. There you go.
Great. All right. Hello, and thank you to Jefferson and Makiba, my co-panelists. Thank you, Zakiya, and thank you to the IIPC conference organizers. I'm very happy to be here. As Zakiya mentioned, I'm Sumitra Duncan. I'm the head of the web archiving program for the New York Art Resources Consortium, also referred to as NYARC. And if you're not familiar with NYARC, NYARC is a New York City-based consortium of the libraries and archives of the Brooklyn Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Frick Art Reference Library of the Frick Collection in New York. So I manage their web archiving program. I've been doing that for about 10 years, focused on web archiving art resources. And today I'll be discussing the Collaborative Art Archive, or CARTA, initiative and sharing some details about our recent program activities and future directions for this collaborative. I spoke about CARTA at IIPC 2022, I believe. That was online with my project co-leads. And our program was really new at that time. We'd only really been formally established for about 6 months. So I have a bit more to talk about today. So I'm excited to share that with you. CARTA utilizes resources and professional expertise from a collaborative entity of arts and cultural heritage institutions in order to build collections of archived web-based content that is related to art history and contemporary art practice, and to enable new types of scholarly use for art-related resources. Having a hard time with this. Sorry. Is there a secret? We're stuck with the title slide. Thank you. All right, shaking it. Just figured it out. Thanks, Jefferson.
Turn it
All
off
right.
and then back on. Yeah.
So the CARTA program developed via a partnership between the Internet Archive and NYARC, and given the Internet Archive's proven history of facilitating community collaboration and their technical expertise and infrastructure, for NYARC, they really made a natural and I'd say an exceptional partner in seeking out our avenues for investigating an appropriate collaborative entity and a cohort model to address this area. NYARC, as I said, had already established our collaborative web archiving program back in 2014 when we web archived specifically art resources, but more recently working with the Internet Archive on this initiative that has really allowed us for expanding upon our work and scaling to address preservation for a much wider swath of the arts community. This project originated from a 2018 IMLS National Leadership Grant that was a grant with the Internet Archive and NYARC, and that was called Advancing Art Libraries and Curated Web Archives. And that allowed us to begin some environmental scans and outreach for the initiative, including in-person forums, events that brought together art librarians pretty much from across North America, recognizing the importance of preserving art resources on the web and also
folks who recognized that there were great advantages and scalability if we looked at a collaborative collecting model. The Internet Archive and NARC are fortunate to have received 2 additional 2-year grants to support the continuation of our initial partnership and collaboration. Those were awarded to us in 2021 by the NEH and the IMLS. These grants allowed for our official launch, which was in August of 2021. With support from NEH and IMLS, we began to formalize the collaborative member group and build out the CARTA Web Archive collections. Our grants, both of which wrapped up at the end of this past summer, so 2023, supported building an access portal and data sets, as well as additional methods for promoting use of the collection data. And we've since developed a membership model based on the needs of our institutional members, and we're looking to further scale both our membership and our collecting into the future. The Internet Archive and CARTA, I think we've made great progress in moving this initiative forward over the past 6 years since our first grant. So wanted to take a second, not to embarrass you, but just to thank the Internet Archive staff and to thank Jefferson for their support. This is something I've been working on for 10 years, so to have it in a stage of realization is really fantastic. And I also wanted to thank my CARTA project team members, Sarah Beth Seymour and Thomas Padilla, for their continued work with me on this initiative. We meet pretty much every week and talk about this quite a lot, so it's exciting. The goals of CARTA are to encompass community building, collection building, facilitating research and access methods, and sustainability and promotion. In the past 2 years, we focused very much on member recruitment, collaborative meetings and discussions. So we hold quarterly all-member meetings. We have subcommittee groups in the areas of collection development, metadata, outreach, and end-user engagement. We've also focused our efforts on creating the CARTA collections themselves, preserving content that's nominated by our members and supplying metadata for those web archives, as well as building the CARTA Access Portal and promotion of use with end users and researchers through hosting datathons and sharing out our data sets. As far as community building, our initial goal was to have 30 members. We exceeded that in the first 2 years of the program during the grant period, and we've had 41 organizations now collaborate on CARTA within that 2-year period. Our members have included a range of organization types and sizes, from smaller art libraries and regional museums to academic institutions and national museums and other arts organizations. Our members have reflected a geographic range throughout the United States and Canada, and we are seeking to expand that reach to include more member organizations to enrich these collections from their subject expertise and to fill in additional regional gaps with the members and collections. A core goal moving forward would be to expand internationally as well and include representatives that have not been reflected in this membership roster and in the collection content. So onto our collections. Our members identified early on the 8 areas that we would collect in initially, and those topics are listed on the slide, but they are art criticism, arts education, art fairs and events, art galleries, art history and scholarship, arts organizations, artists' websites, and auction houses. CARTA members began nominating websites for these collections to be archived in November of 2021, so we're now at about the 2.5-year mark of collecting. We continue to accept website nominations from members on a quarterly basis as we continue to grow the collections. And hopefully you can see that. We have, at this point, over 900 websites across the 8 collections, which equates to 16 terabytes of data. So that's 2.5 years worth at this point as we've grown the membership. And the current majority of these sites presently fall in the areas of arts organizations and artist websites. The collection areas also have a significant number of sites that were deemed as very highly at risk at the moment that they were nominated. So they were sites that were captured right away. Many of them disappeared shortly thereafter from smaller art organizations and artist sites who were no longer maintaining their sites, many because of the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to the amount of work in the formation of the web archive, we created subcommittee groups from members of the collaborative. The metadata subcommittee, for example, accomplished establishing and integrating metadata standards into the collections during our quarterly working sessions. We were able to leverage expertise and experience from small groups within the membership from different organizations. And we added standardized metadata to aid in discovery on the CARTA portal. Our collection development subcommittee has also recently finished the first draft of CARTA's collection development policy. Next up, we'll be tackling creation of a takedown policy and processes for that. And I thought it was important also to note, the members that are part of the collaborative, they don't have to be experts in web archiving or have experience in doing that in order to participate. The partnership with the Internet Archive has allowed for web archivists on their end to really handle the technical side of this on the back end. So CARTA members are focusing on the collection development, they're focused on engaging with researchers and end users, and additionally in promoting and doing outreach for the collaborative. In April of last year, we launched the CARTA portal, which provides unified access to all of the CARTA collections. This is the homepage here. And I've included the URL at the top so that you can explore all the great content that we have within these collections. The CARTA portal also allows for end users to browse and search across all of the CARTA curated collections, but additionally, we've included 70 other collections that equate to about 20 terabytes of data that already existed from arts-related web collections, primarily from other Archivit partners, or in the case of myself, from my own Archivit collections at NIARC. So those are all accessible via the CARTA portal as well. So we have a streamlined place for people to find art-related web archives. The CARTA collections are searchable by contributing organization, collection, site, and page text. There's advanced search supporting more granular exploration by host or file types, beginning and end dates, and additional filters there. The development of the portal really built on the Internet Archive's experience creating the community webs portal that Jefferson mentioned and the COVID-19 web archive. And then I also wanted to briefly mention another important component of our objectives for the grant periods, which were to develop and execute a series of hands-on workshops in which participants, learned how to use data analysis and web archiving tools while utilizing data sets that were derived from these art-specific CARTA web archive collections. So we saw a high level of success with each of those workshops. The goals were really to help librarians, archivists, art historians, digital humanities scholars to start determining how they might use web archives as a source for computational analysis. The workshop shared ideas on how to identify and support research use cases that would benefit from web data analysis and how to get started with the art research community. And this past year, we also shared a white paper that culminated from those datathons and trainings. That's called CARTA Promoting Computational Research and Art on the Web. And we've shared the research data sets that were generated from the CARTA collections. Those are openly available for reuse via archive.org. And finally, looking towards the future, our primary goal is continued growth of the collections and the membership. And we have just recently developed and I believe finalized a membership model that'll go into place as of this summer. That's aimed at covering, the program costs in a flexible, sustainable way. There are 3 tiers of membership in terms of affordability as well as number of nominations that can be made by members. So we're hoping, to promote sustainability through that. We're also looking into additional grant funding opportunities to support members who don't have the budgets or the staff necessarily to join via the paid model. We have also formed an advisory board at the end of this past year in order to expand the self-governance of the group, and the Internet Archive Program Officer will continue to partner with the advisory board and facilitate all of the activity of this community moving forward so we keep our momentum going. And I think that's about it for me, and here's our email address if anyone would like to get in touch afterwards. Thanks so much for listening.
All right, thank you again to our wonderful panelists. Can we get another hand for them? I'm also going to give them a special hand because they were all under 15 minutes, and that never happens. Like, I feel like this is a winning team. We'll start. I have a few questions for you all, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from our wonderful audience here. First thing I wanted to ask is sort of thinking about how all of you in your community-oriented programs talked about some sort of gap that was pre-existing in the web archiving field or in web archiving programs. And I wanted to hear you sort of elaborate a little bit more about those gaps that you perceived that your program is sort of filling in. And what are your thoughts on how, outside of your amazing programs and the work that you're doing, how the field itself, whether that sort of be IIPC, library programs, or other spaces, how can they sort of be working with you in filling those gaps as well? Anyone can start.
I'll jump in a little bit on that. There are kind of two sides to my answer for that. The initial piece of it, we saw a gap just in terms of the content itself at first. Jefferson showed the chart with the web archiving survey results of types of institutions engaged in web archiving, and museums were 1% of that. They're not so represented at the time. And I know just from my work with the Art Library Society, where many of my co-art librarians and archivists meet, there wasn't really web archiving going on. That wasn't happening. But from our collecting perspective at our institutions, historically, the materials that we had collected in print, we were starting to find those shifting to a digital format, born digital format, and things like artists' ephemeral pamphlets, press releases, catalog raisonnés of artists, auction catalogs, all of those things. We didn't have a way to address that. So that's something that our institution started working on in a pilot partnership with Internet Archive probably like 15 years ago, to look at using Archivit to archive these auction catalogs. And thankfully, they thought that was a viable solution. So we got some more grant funding. We established a program, started digging into this, but we're one institution and one web archivist trying to address that. And, I'm based in New York, so I'm focused on New York City galleries and artists represented in our museums. But even having done this for 10 years, I've archived a lot of content, but that's certainly a drop in the bucket of the scope. I can't claim to, really be able to represent artists and folks in these other geographic areas, other areas of expertise. And Jefferson and I probably started talking about this like 2015. How do we get these other institutions, these other folks involved in this so that they're able to nominate the sites that they know are of importance, so we don't lose that record? So the second part of your question, the real challenge is resources, of course. No surprise there, but having met with art librarians through Arliss, many of them have said, we have one staff person, our collections budget is tiny, we can't bring on staff to do web archiving, we're not able to pay for a subscription service, we don't have a person who can even use a quarter of their time to manually harvest these sites. So we're like, what can we do about this? We really want to make some progress in this area. So thankfully, through the work that we've done over the past few years, we've really started to make a little bit of progress and cover more of this content and have more voices represented from the arts community.
Go ahead. And so for us, in terms of experiencing or noticing the gap, the disparity within web archiving, particularly because some of this research was also with Burgess in his dissertation research, and so he had started doing some surveys, and we had our suspicions that there were not very many Black collecting organizations, whether they were community-based or formal institutions like HBCUs, doing this kind of work despite, their commitment to preserving Black life in their archives or small community-based museums and things like that. And so the funding from IMLS allowed us to really explore our suspicions. And from that, we did an environmental scan, and very few of the HBCUs were practicing web archiving because of all of the things, not because they don't have the ability to gain those skills, but access to skill building in the area of web archiving, but then also being under-resourced where they have backlogs of just their regular archives and not being able to get through those. But the possibility of falling behind, and that this practice is not necessarily something new, and it's been around for as long as it has, but still not sort of made inroads into other kind of institutions besides the very well-heeled ones. And so we thought that particularly because there was just a proliferation of Blackness in the digital space, and how Black culture and history sort of drives some of the content that you experience on the web. We just felt like it was something that we had to figure out a way to create some kind of intervention around. And so that has been the work as to how we're looking at filling that gap. And it's not something that we can do alone, but it's something that, we're trying to at least tackle, and hopefully other folks think about that also through another lens of other marginalized groups and how they also are being left out of the public record in terms of preserving that knowledge. In terms of resources, we hope that we intend to continue the work of archiving the Black web. And so we've been very fortunate to have two funders see the value of this work with IMLS and Mellon. And so trying to build in some sustainability within the work that we do. And we have two models next to us that really helps us to be inspired that this work is important to keep doing it. So, yeah.
Yep, I think certainly the web archiving is almost, 30 years old? It's about 25, 30 years old that folks have been doing web archiving, and it really still remains the dominion of very large institutions. Look at IIPC's membership. It's national libraries, NGOs, and large research libraries. So it's been going on for a long time, and yet it still hasn't really trickled down to even in just the US, tens of thousands of cultural heritage institutions whose mandate and passion is to, preserve history and preserve voices and document people's lives. So I think we all know the technical challenges, the resource challenges, the expertise challenges. So the sort of twin goal, besides the obvious difficulties introducing smaller organizations into web archiving, came out of sort of the archiving world, where archival silences started to get a lot more attention, and sort of archival theory and practice probably about a similar time, 20 or 30 years ago, where people became more aware that the archival record really was documenting very small portions of the world and of the population. So I think if by focusing on smaller organizations, they can diversify the record, while you're also diversifying the profession and diversifying the collections and the types of institutions. So I think it was sort of the collection aspect and the institution aspect were the challenges that we're trying to address. And I don't exactly know the answer about how do we do more of this. We have the luxury at Internet Archive that we have infrastructure and staff, and we can get grants and make it easier to do program development like this. But I know it's more challenging in other organizations, many of which have hundreds of millions of dollars more than we do. So hopefully they can find a way. But I think, for those of us in the IIPC, the community that have been doing web archiving a lot, it's how can we take the resources that we have, how can we cut through the bureaucracy that we have, whatever the case may be, to figure out how to get some smaller organizations involved.
Thank you. So one more question before we open it up. So as I'm sure we all know, collaboration makes things easier, but it also is a very difficult thing to master for ourselves, and also as sort of the facilitators of large groups of collaborators, that can also be very difficult. So, sort of in your development of these community-oriented programs, could you sort of share, because a lot of you have said, hoping that other people sort of pick up the torch where you all are also doing this work. What are some sort of successes and challenges that you faced in collaboration and in fostering collaboration in each of your programs that you can share with the audience, as some may be looking to develop similar programs?
Me to go first. I'm the newest. I'm the new kid on the block. I would say, just for us as a new entity, it is, we want, and it's about diversifying, right? We want to have as many folks at the table, but also that can get a little unwieldy. But it is important for us to be able to hear from diverse perspectives around this particular issue, some of the thought leaders. So we've created advisory boards with folks from the Internet Archive and other places that have been critical to our understanding, but then also still centering sort of the cultural importance of what we're trying to do as well. So honoring that aspect as well. But the collaboration for us is critical because the work that we're trying to do is also to sort of create these connections between Blackness, which is different in a lot of different ways, but then also some of the sameness. So how someone that's Black in a Black community in one region might have a different experience from a Black community in another region, but how do we think about that in a collaborative way to put possibly those web archives into conversation with each other around maybe the same topic, but just from different regional perspectives. So I say yay to collaboration, but then also, yeah, it's hard.
I think for Community Webs, the biggest success on the collaboration has been like the passion of the participants. I had worked in a public library, so I knew public librarians were awesome, but they are so enthusiastic and motivated. And at least in the US, public librarianship is almost like a social service job, not just a librarian job. So the fact that it was community documenting, and they worked very closely with our local arts and community outreach and social service agencies around the collection buildings. There's a lot of engagement with non-library institutions and organizations and collectives locally. So the passion, and then of course, many of them, as I mentioned, sort of got professional recognition or awards or promotions or grants or funding themselves out of the program. So I think that was the success, the most rewarding success, at least for us. The challenges, one is the funding, of course. Not just like writing grants and getting grants and recruiting funders, but also having to deal with the misery of grant administration, which is not that much fun. At least for us, the finances aren't a deal breaker, but I think if people are going to try to build at least sort of big-ish or national scale programs, funding is always going to be a piece of the pie. So that was a hard part of the collaboration. I think another is that in the web archiving community, we are very jargonized, and that we have all these words that nobody has any clue what the hell we're talking about, with the crawls and seeds and the scopes and all this stuff. So I think it was challenging it wasn't challenging, but like it makes you aware of the fact that you operate in a very specialized community that hasn't necessarily yet gotten to the stage where it's really generalized its communication or its how it articulates its theories or things like that. So there's a little challenge in onboarding some folks who really were technically challenged to begin with, and when you get to something as specialized as web archiving, they were even more challenged. And I think the it's not necessarily a challenge of collaboration, but I think for programs like all of ours, you really have to go out there and beat the bushes and recruit folks, and you really have to do the groundwork and legwork to try to get people to join the program, no matter how much outreach or presentation or marketing you do. It's still, there's, as I mentioned, 10,000 public libraries in the US. We have 200. That's just still a fraction. So a lot more that can be recruited and can participate, but you really have to get the message out there.
I think I can echo a lot of what you both just said. You said it really well. But one piece of it I was thinking about additionally is sort of the volunteer nature of many of these collaborations. CARTA members are all volunteering their time to participate in this, and some folks are very enthusiastic. They carve out more time, they participate on the subcommittees, have joined the advisory board, and others are not able to do that so much. Maybe they were on the metadata subcommittee at first, they no longer show up to that meeting. We lose some traction in those cases, so it is a little frustrating. You have to just try to keep pushing forward and bring new people on if some drop off, that kind of thing. But what has helped us a lot is having a program officer from the Internet Archive. Sarah Beth Seymour right now is in that role, and sort of holding the line to make sure that we don't fully lose our momentum, make sure that our quarterly meetings happen, checking in with people for feedback. That has really helped a lot because there's staff turnover in a lot of places frequently, and that can really be detrimental. We've had some institutions that are no longer going to be participating organizations because of that. So you make some progress, then you get some steps back, and the funding piece of it, of course, is large in order to actually be sustainable moving forward. It's a concern as far as inconsistent funding, what you can do to kind of bridge the gap on that. I'll just leave it there. So we have some time.
Okay, thank you. So you heard it, funding. So if anybody has large pockets of money, we'll be accepting them on the stage after we're done, or start a foundation and we'll apply to your grant, and it'll be greatly appreciated. But now we'll also turn over to you all for if anyone has any questions. We have a mic coming down or around or behind you. So just wait for the mic so that everyone can hear you, please.
Hello, hi, my name is Leonie. Thank you for the panel. I was wondering, how do people get to you? Is there just a very broad knowledge about web archiving in the US, or do you have to advocate also a lot for web archiving? Because I was wondering, I'm from Berlin. I guess if somebody would create workshops and give knowledge to people, probably there won't be so many people attending them, but that's my guess. And I was wondering, how do you get the momentum for people to join, actually?
For us, we go to a lot of conferences. We do a lot of events. We do marketing campaigns and listservs. People, there's contact forms. So once people find out about it, they basically just fill out a form and they apply, and then they go through a onboarding process. But it really, as I mentioned, it is really beating the bushes, like the same listservs over and over, listservs you hadn't thought of, communities you hadn't thought of, professional associations, even like very hyper local ones, like in a big metropolitan area or something, there might be an archivist roundtable or, a sort of informal group. So connecting with those. And a lot of it, honestly, is word of mouth. So once you get enough people, then it's kind of word of mouth. And but it is definitely a lot of outreach.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Lots of outreach. In my particular case, the scope is somewhat more narrow. So identifying organizations where art historians are involved, or folks working in museums or art libraries, galleries. The Art Libraries Society of North America has been a primary point of outreach for us thus far. We had a web archiving special interest group within that organization, so attendees to their events could attend the sessions and ask questions and learn more about it. We've given a lot of CARTA updates to other special interest groups within that organization. I presented at the International Conference of Art Libraries 2 years ago, just trying to get the word out, really. Our workshops have helped a bit with that as well, but it, I think, is not widely known at this point that it exists or you could join.
I would say for sort of the HBCUs, that is a formal sort of organization that does sort of library archival work. So they understand and know about it. It's just not having access to opportunities to build those skills because they're not teaching it in library schools, not really, or not as something that's like across the board. This is something that you learn in library school. So, but they are aware of it. Our challenge is mainly with community-based organizations because we do think that they should be in the web archiving space. And so where we have been successful is that our one of our partner organizations, founding organizations, is Shift, and they do a lot of work with community-based archives. So we sort of have already an inroad with folks that are doing some of this work. They just haven't been able to move over to web archiving as a practice of documenting their community. So it is about connections and knowing folks to say, hey, I participated in community webs. I think this would be a good program for your library. You should really apply. So it's sort of the networks, and back to your question around collaboration and really trying to encourage people to think about the next phase of their collecting and preservation practice in their institution. So yeah.
Yeah, I would also follow up and say, as far as outreach, if anybody wants a community webs program in their country, maybe let us know. It's a model that's designed to be picked up and put in a separate location. I know that public library systems are not the same in every country as they are in the US, but we did basically take community webs and not move it, but we implemented it in Canada, and we have 40 Canadian organizations that are part of it now. And it's actually not that many public libraries. It's a lot of community archives and a lot of tribal archives and indigenous cultural centers. So that was much more successful in Canada than it was in the US as far as trying to recruit tribal archives. But it really is a model that sort of works anywhere, and we run Archive It. So if that's part of the model, we can help with that. And yes, so if you're in a country that is not the US, Canada, and you're in this room and you're like, that sounds cool, let me know.
I have another question.
It's a great panel, and all the presentations really interesting, lots of lessons to take away. But my question is specifically for Makiba. So you're right, because library schools aren't catering for these skills that people need. So is there an opportunity for people from outside of the US to join the WAC school? I'm based in the UK, and I know some people that would be really great if they could join your program to help us build our more representative web archive in our country.
I think we would be open, but I will say, because we have funding from a U.S.-based funder, like the sort of re-granting programs, and so the funding part of, if you were to participate, we couldn't probably fund you, but participating and just learning and soaking in, yes, you could. We talk to me later. We'll see how we can work on that. Particularly if you're in Ireland, you said. UK?
Yes.
I'm in the UK, but I'm Irish, so I know other Irish people that might be interested.
Yes, so definitely one of our first webinars or forums that we hosted, we had a young man from the Black Irish movement, and so looking at his work and how Blackness is of the diaspora, so it does have international capacity, but certainly let's talk after. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this great panel and discussion. I think it's very, very important and interesting what you are part of. I was wondering, but Makiba, you started to answer about it. The consequences also of these efforts on the community, because we see there are a lot of assets for preservation, inclusiveness in archives. But I was also wondering, what are the effects on the community? So you explained you have to build an advisory board. People know their websites have a value, and they are. I was also wondering, did they change in both of your fields the way eventually they develop their websites or they interact on the live web? If they think about making it more archivable eventually or not. So what are the consequences on also the live web, the daily practices of having digital presses and their digital cultures?
So for the work that we're trying to do it's also about building awareness. So really, and I've mentioned sort of community-based web archives, but also we've been thinking about just like the individual practitioner of culture within the community and how do we support them. And so if they are an entity of one, like, should they also be included in this opportunity for skill building? And so we are thinking through trying to make this practice as inclusive as possible. And so if I'm understanding your question, in terms of sort of the web and the content that we're trying to preserve, one of the things is that, like, even though I'm at an institution, Shift Collective, but like this is a work that is not sort of steeped in an institution where we're going to own whatever it is that you all are working on. It is for you to document. And so we're just trying to create capacity and build skill for you because we see this work as a larger effort around the history of our communities and the public record. And it would be a failure on our part as cultural heritage institutions, libraries, to not have equipped our communities with a way in which, for folks to come back 30, 40 years later and to really be able to try to at least glean what has happened from more than just one dominant perspective. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but the work that we're trying to do is to be as inclusive as possible. And so I feel like I would be remiss if I don't say this, because Jefferson sort of started leading this way. I would like to challenge IIPC to really rethink how they move forward with their membership. I am a part of a small liberal arts college that is not doing sort of this kind of work around web archiving. The work that I'm doing there is because it is my own personal research, but then like the work that we're trying to do with community-based and diversifying the practice of web archiving, it requires us to look beyond the way in which we allow members to be a part of this organization. So I'll leave it at that, but I think that needs to be, if it's not already being done, but there needs to be conversations. If for the futurity of this work, it has to be more than just the kind of organizations that are now members of IIPC. I'm done.
I will second that. As far as the impact on the community, at least for the Community Webs program, we did. The members did receive funding to hold public programming events, so I think there was similar awareness building locally. They also got money to work directly with individual organizations around preserving their websites at the time, and in the most recent round of funding, there is capacity for them to basically give digital archiving services to non-libraries in their community. So it's probably going to be more oriented towards just digital preservation and probably less web archiving because their stuff is already being web archived by the public library. But it is sort of handing out capacity to organizations that wouldn't necessarily, they might have to pay for Dropbox or, some kind of crappy commercial service for basic storage and preservation. So trying to at least like make the public library members more a locus of preservation, not just from the aspect of collecting, but also from providing preservation services to the community. So I think for us, that's been most of the sort of community impact beyond the documentation.
On our end, I think we're kind of early into it in a way. We haven't done, say, paid for folks to attend conferences or specific trainings and things like that, but they're things we're interested in. But what we have focused on a bit just more recently is the datathon workshops, really trying to connect with who our end users are, because we don't always actually know who those end users are, and we need to identify potential researchers who are interested in these collections. And so we've done a lot in terms of raising the awareness within the art library community and how those librarians and archivists might work with their constituencies to actually understand what they would like to have preserved, how they would like to use this, what the implication is further out from that with the computational analysis. That's just a small piece of it, I think, at this point.
Are there any more questions? Okay. If not, we will get 6 minutes back of a break. So
let's give our chair a round of applause too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zakiya.
You're too kind. Thank you so much to our panelists, and I hope that you all will go forth and create community-oriented programs to increase and diversify web archiving.
Yay.